very much, Dr. Walia, for that very nice introduction. I should have made that shorter. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for coming this morning as well. Dr. Rao had touched on a number of issues with respect to challenging patents, and clearly prior art-based challenges, et cetera, are the mainstay. But over the years, there have been a number of other challenges that have been brought forth before against patents, and I wanted to touch on a few of these things. I call it a Canadian perspective, but as you'll see in my talk, I think it'll be pervasive to most other jurisdictions. Excuse me. So, some of you who know me know that I have a tendency to get into segues, so I don't want to let anyone down. So let me add a segue here. When I was 6 years old, a group from the UK called the Hollies had a song entitled "He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother." When I mentioned this to my children, they said, "You had music back in the 60s?" So I'm sure that question doesn't come up here, but you are probably wondering, what does this have to do with my talk? Well, the first verse of the song goes as follows: "The road is long with many a winding turn that leads us to who knows where, who knows where." When you think of the Section 101 challenges in the US, the Section 3D challenges in Canada, in India, and some of the challenges in Canada that I'll get to in a minute, I can't help but wonder if the Hollies were foretelling the challenges that are being faced in the life science patent world. So let me give you some background. As many of you know, biotech patents, pharma patents, have a number of unique issues. I mean, first of all, there's a number of different aspects of an invention that have to be claimed, and they're claimed in various different forms of claims, of course. So we have compounds, processes, methods, etc. The definition of patentable subject matter does vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So we have, for example, methods of medical treatment that are patentable, say, in the US, but not in Canada, Europe, or most other jurisdictions. Disclosure requirements also vary. And for example, in terms of claim amendments in Europe and Japan and other jurisdictions, you need to have explicit support, literal support in your description. For India, we have the efficacy 3D issue. In Canada, we have this wonderful new body of law dealing with utility requirements that I'll get to in a minute. And the trouble with respect to most of these things is there's a conflict between obtaining the data to support all these requirements under various national law and the first-to-file regime. So you're at a crossroads when you're trying to file that first application, because you'd like to have more data, but of course you don't have time to do so. And as I mentioned here, all these issues have to be dealt with quite often right at the date of your priority application. So you have to almost, again, like the Hollies, sort of foretell the future in terms of what you're going to be claiming or looking to claim, and then cover that off in your priority application. So let's touch on Canada for a second, and the rule usually goes, start off with a joke, so I can't refuse. As some of you may know, Celine Dion is a Canadian singer who moved to the US a number of years ago, and she's a very polarizing figure, either lover or hater, so this cartoon was obviously to one side of that argument. In terms of, I call claim strategy, in Canada, let me give you a little background first. In Canada, we can include in an application any variety of claims. It's very liberal in that sense in terms of what you can include in a patent or patent application. So products, processes, uses, etc., dosage forms, all these different forms of claims can be included into one application. Under the use definition, you'll see I mentioned both Swiss type, this is the use of compound X in the manufacture of a medicament, etc., as well as medical use claims. So use of compound X in treating Y, this type of thing. Both forms are possible in Canada, and I recommend actually putting in both forms, as again I'll mention in a second. There's no claims fees in Canada, which comes as a nice surprise to many applicants. So you can include as many claims as you want, multiple dependent claims, independent claims. There's no end. You just put it all in. It's all inclusive in your filing fee, so there's no reason not to. Dr. Rao had mentioned double patenting. In divisionals, in Canada, under Canadian law, it is possible to file divisionals, but we, as in the US, have an obviousness type double patenting prohibition. Now, unlike the US, we don't have a terminal disclaimer practice, which means that if you face a double patenting rejection based on your parent case, unfortunately, it's too late. There's nothing you can do about it except to amend your claims to get around, or obviously drop your divisional application. Now, on that note, one thing I recommend there, of course, is that there is a way to immunize yourself against that by having the examiner issue a unity rejection. So what I recommend to clients is, when you're looking at potentially filing a divisional application, prior to doing so, include all your divisional claims in your parent case. If the examiner allows it, you have one case, and that's wonderful. But if the examiner issues a unity rejection, your divisional is free and clear of the double patenting issue. Again, we have no claims fees, so you can continue to do that. Marquis groups offer another challenge in Canadian law, in that we have a decision here, as I mentioned, from 2005, that held that all members of a Marquis group must have the same utility, or have the utility that you're stating in your patent. So in this particular example, there was one claim. There was a method of making a compound, clarithromycin form 2. In the method claim, there was a Marquis group listing solvents. Unfortunately, the 17 solvents that were listed, of those, only 3 were found to actually result in the desired compound. That claim was deemed to be invalid for lack of utility. So in fact, in that case, the court actually said that if the claim, and offered some advice, if the claim was worded in the alternative, so instead of having a Marquis group, if you said it's A, B, or C, then each of those elements would have been treated separately, and you wouldn't have had this pitfall. But unfortunately, in this case, the Marquis group caused that to occur. So again, from a prosecution perspective, drafting perspective, my recommendation is to avoid Marquis groups and try to replace them, at least during prosecution, with alternative language. Now, we had spoken earlier, I believe Dr. Mehta had mentioned the Orange Book in the US. We have in Canada the Patent Register, which is the equivalent. And again, to have a patent eligible for inclusion in the Patent Register, you have to have a certain type of claim format. So specifically, your patent has to have a claim directed to a medicinal ingredient, a formulation, dosage form, or a use. Now, the term use here, you have to be careful, because it's the use in treatment, mitigation, or prevention of a condition or disease. It's not use in manufacture. So, for example, intermediates, uses in manufacture, etc., metabolites, these type of claims do not qualify or allow the patent to be eligible for inclusion in the Patent Register. So we have to be careful how you claim it. So as I mentioned before, if you have a Swiss type claim, it's very important to also include, or at least substitute, a medical use claim instead, so you can have the right to include your patent on the register. We have a specificity requirement. Again, this is a requirement that's been determined by our courts, where your new drug application, the NDA, has to perfectly match, and I put that in quotes on purpose, the claims of your patent. So I'll give you an example of two examples of where this fell through, unfortunately. In Gilead, this is back in 2012, the patent claimed a formulation of, as I mentioned here, A, B, and a class of C. There was no specific C claimed, although it was mentioned in disclosure. The NDA had a formulation specified of A, B, and a specific C. Now, that falls within the patent claim, of course, but the court held that because the NDA didn't perfectly match any of the claims of the patent was ineligible for listing. Similarly here, the patent in the Purdue case, the patent was related to oxycodone, and the NDA was for oxycodone with another ingredient. Again, due to the lack of perfect match, that patent also was not eligible for inclusion. Use claims we have to be very careful with, and the way the courts have come to over the last few years is, if your claims are directed to what is being used, and I put that in quotes as well, as opposed to how or when, then you're okay. Now, I've provided a table here just summarizing some of decisions of the last few years. On the left, we have a column listing claim types that have been found to be patentable, and on the right, the opposite. So just very quickly, some examples here. We have a use of X to treat Y. That type of claim is referred to as a what claim, where the what being the X. Similarly, use of a specific dosage, 10 milligrams, for example, of X to treat Y. Again, it's a what. On the right-hand side, you'll see examples where you have use of X on an upper leg to treat Y, the difference there is that that's a claim to a how. And similarly with the dosage forms, again, it's a range where, in particular, where you have a weight-based range, the courts have deemed those type of claims to be how claims. In other words, you're basically requiring a professional skill of a physician or medical practitioner in order to meet the requirement of that use. So those claims are not found to be patentable. Excuse me. So in sum, a good way of phrasing this would be that your claim has to be directed to a vendable product. So the actual compound, a dosage, a specific dosage, like a pill, for example, and not directed to any subject matter that would require some professional skill. Again, if you have a dosage form based on weight of X milligrams per kilogram per day, I mean, certainly, like a grade school child could probably figure out if your 100 kilos is what your dosage is going to be. Unfortunately, our courts have held that even that